The camera never blinks. Neither do they. Not really. You've seen that smile before. Perfectly curved, not too wide, not too tight. It lingers just long enough to feel familiar, but never long enough to feel real. The lighting soft, the background patriotic, the voice gentle like velvet over a blade, and behind the lens, thousands watch, unblinking. But what are they really watching? You're not seeing a person, you're seeing a performance. One so meticulously crafted, you forgot it was a performance at all. Politicians don't sell policies. They sell certainty, warmth, control, hope, repackaged and rehearsed. The truth is, when they speak, they're not talking to you. They're talking as you. A version of you, reflected through the funhouse mirror of polls, focus groups, and decades of psychological engineering. That charming chuckle, it was timed. That pause for emotion, written, that tear in the eye, watered by consultants. We crave leaders who feel like us, but stronger, smarter, more in control. So they give us exactly that, not who they are, but who we want to believe they are. And that's where the game begins. You see, this manipulation isn't clumsy. It's hypnotic. In dark psychology, there's a tactic called mirroring, where one person subtly imitates another's speech, gestures, and mood to build rapport. It makes us feel seen, understood, safe. Politicians have taken this and turned it into an art form. Their language shifts depending on who's watching. They don't just speak your language, they become your dialect. The poor hear struggle, the wealthy hear growth. The angry hear justice, the afraid hear protection. Each smile becomes a mirror, reflecting back whatever you need most to stay listening. Now think of that speech that moved you, not because of the facts, but because of how it felt. The warmth in your chest, the nodding, that tiny spark of trust you didn't know you were offering. That's not an accident. That's the smile behind the curtain. There's another trick at play here. Something psychologists call priming. By subtly embedding cues, colors, symbols, words, they manipulate your subconscious. A blue tie signals calm. A flag signals loyalty. A baby in their arms signals compassion. These visual anchors bypass logic entirely. They whisper straight to your animal brain. This is safe. This is good. This is strong. You weren't persuaded. You were conditioned. And then comes the voice. Steady, unwavering, just above a whisper. Never rushed. It's a cadence sculpted by experts in persuasion. There's power in the pauses, in those perfectly timed silences, because in silence, you lean forward. You want to believe, and in that wanting, your guard drops. They know, this isn't just performance, it's puppetry. You might think you're immune to it, that you can see through the mask. But here's the darker truth. The more confident you are in your resistance, the more vulnerable you become, because psychological manipulation thrives on unconscious surrender. Take the halo effect, a bias where our impression of one trait, like charisma, colors everything else. If a politician seems likable, we assume they're honest, competent, moral. Even when their words don't match the record, we forgive it, because they feel right. And once they've hooked you emotionally, logic falls apart. They don't need to change your mind. They only need to change your mood. A smile can do that. A sigh, a perfectly placed moment of eye contact through a screen, and still, we follow. We share their videos. We quote their phrases. We argue for them, bleed for them, defend them like family. Because that's how good the illusion is. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like loyalty, but in every loyalty lies a blind spot, one they're counting on. Because the more attached we become to their persona, the less likely we are to question it. And when doubt finally stirs, we suppress it, because questioning them feels like questioning ourselves. They've become a part of our identity. Their mask is now stitched to our skin. And when the curtain trembles, when the cracks show and the illusion starts to unravel, most won't look away. They'll just look harder and call it truth. But truth isn't what they offer. Truth is unpredictable. Truth has rough edges, contradictions, sharp corners that cut. No, what they offer is smoother. easier, safer, a narrative with no seams, a dream worn like a suit, worn until it fits. And while we watch the performance, entranced, hopeful, blind, something quieter happens beneath it all. They study us, not our names, not our stories, but our patterns, our emotions, the tiny flickers of attention, the viral moments, the triggers. And with every election, every press conference, every speech that goes viral, they sharpen the mask. They learn what makes you cheer. They learn what makes you afraid. They learn what makes you vote. The illusion evolves. The mask smiles wider. And just as you're about to turn away, just as the doubt creeps in, they whisper your name. And the curtain falls again. But behind it, nothing moves without reason. Fear doesn't knock. It slips under the door. It breathes down your neck when you're not looking. It lingers in headlines, glows behind screens, and waits patiently in the pauses between promises. And politicians, those architects of perception, know this better than anyone. Because when it comes to controlling the masses, fear isn't just effective, it's obedient. They don't need to make you understand something. They only need to make you afraid of what happens if you don't. And once fear takes root, it doesn't argue. It obeys. You've felt it before, haven't you? The tightening in your gut when they speak of a collapsing economy. The invisible danger they insist is just beyond the border. The faceless enemy who wants to destroy your way of life. It's always vague enough to avoid scrutiny, but sharp enough to pierce your sleep. That's not information. That's orchestration. This is where dark psychology thrives. What researchers call fear-based framing. Politicians use it constantly because fear bypasses logic. It activates the amygdala, the primal center of threat response. Once triggered, your brain doesn't ask for evidence. It asks, fight or flee. And politicians, well, they offer a third option, vote. You see it in every campaign cycle, every crisis, every rally. They paint the world as a fragile thing, teetering on the edge of chaos. But only they, this party, this leader, this moment, can save you from the darkness. Without them, the shadows close in. It's subtle, surgical. Watch closely, and you'll see how they contrast. We're not perfect, they'll admit, but at least we're not them. They never sell you utopia. They sell you survival. Because survival is primal. You'll cling to it long after hope has died. They trigger the negativity bias, the brain's habit of prioritizing threats over rewards. It's why bad news spreads faster, why angry voices drown out calm ones, why a whisper of danger makes your heart race louder than a scream of peace. And once that fear takes hold, they tighten the strings. Immigrants, inflation, corruption, disease. Each one a specter in a different mask. Each one inflated just enough to make you feel it. And the truth? It almost doesn't matter anymore. Because fear doesn't wait for facts. Take this. When people are afraid, their critical thinking drops. Not because they become stupid, but because their brain redirects resources. It doesn't analyze, it reacts, it simplifies, it searches for a savior. And that's when the stage lights rise. The leader appears. They speak in absolutes. They offer certainty where uncertainty lives. They draw lines in the sand. Us versus them. Every threat needs a villain, and if one doesn't exist naturally, one is manufactured. You see, politicians don't just respond to fear. They create it. With precision. With purpose. Because when you're afraid, you're distracted. You're divided. And when you're divided, you're controllable. Ask yourself, how many times have you heard phrases like, "They're coming for your jobs. They want to take away your rights." If we lose this election, we lose everything. Now pause. Who's they? The brilliance of fear-based messaging lies in its ambiguity. They becomes whoever you're already suspicious of. Your neighbor, your boss, the media, the government, the people voting differently than you. Fear makes the vague feel personal. It turns shadows into threats. And when fear is shared across millions, it becomes contagious. It becomes policy. Because once fear becomes public, it justifies anything. More surveillance? For your safety. Harsher laws? For your protection. Division? For your own good. People begin to beg for the very controls they once resisted. And behind that curtain, the puppet strings tighten. But fear doesn't last forever. It burns hot, fast, and they know that, so they stoke it over and over again, with every news cycle, with every new crisis, manufactured or real. It doesn't matter. It only matters that you feel it, because a scared voter is a predictable voter, and fear, it breeds loyalty. Not love, not trust, but loyalty born of dependence. A desperate need to feel safe, even when the one offering protection is the same one feeding the fear. Like a shepherd who warns of wolves, then paints the forest red himself. But the darkest part isn't what they say. It's what they make you say. Suddenly you're repeating their phrases, you're spreading their fear, you're defending policies you once questioned because now survival feels urgent. And slowly, you forget what the fear was even about, only that it was real. It became a part of you, and that's when the transformation is complete. You're not just being manipulated, you're helping them do it, because fear isolates, it blinds, and most importantly, it silences. You stop asking questions, you stop listening to reason, you stop trusting your own thoughts. And in that silence, their voice becomes the only one left. It's a whisper, it's a warning, it's a lullaby. And you follow. Because fear doesn't knock, it doesn't need to, it already has a key, choice. That sacred word we hold like armor, the belief that we are free to decide, that we weigh, we judge, we think, and then we choose. But what if I told you that choice itself was part of the illusion? That by the time you stepped into the voting booth, the decision had already been made. Not by force, not by law, but by something far more dangerous: design. You see, real control doesn't come from limiting options. It comes from carefully curating which options you see and how they're presented. It's called the illusion of choice, and it's one of the most insidious tools in the psychological playbook. Here's how it works. Imagine walking into a store, 2 brands of cereal. You pick one. You feel satisfied. But what you didn't know is that both brands are owned by the same company. The choice you made felt personal, but it served the same master either way. Politics works the same way. 2 candidates, 2 parties, red versus blue. Change versus tradition. The theater of opposition is essential. It makes you believe your voice has power, but underneath the surface, the money that funds them, the strategies that shape them, the consultants that mold their public personas, those forces don't change with your vote. They just adapt. And adaptation is subtle, because they don't tell you who to vote for. They just make sure the options you're given were already pre-approved. Ever noticed how candidates on opposing sides somehow sound eerily alike when the stakes are highest? That's not coincidence. It's convergence. Over time, political messaging narrows, not around what's true, but around what's safe, what's marketable, what survives the media cycle. And suddenly, you're not voting between 2 radically different visions. You're voting between 2 polished versions of the same strategy. Control the menu, and it doesn't matter what people order. That's the game. But it goes deeper. Because once the options are set, they manipulate how you perceive them. It starts with framing. The way a question is asked changes the way you answer it. Take the same policy, describe it using fear for one candidate and hope for another. Watch how quickly people split, not because the facts changed, but because the frame did. This happens constantly. You're not deciding between reality and delusion. You're deciding between versions of reality, already spun, softened, sharpened, and dressed for the camera. You're not thinking freely. You're reacting predictably. And then there's the most unsettling part: choice overload. It sounds strange, doesn't it? We think more options mean more freedom, but too many choices actually paralyze the brain. It leads to anxiety, confusion, decision fatigue. And politicians know this. So they flood you with narratives. Crime, jobs, identity, culture, scandals, crises. They drown you in signal noise until your only relief is retreating to the simplest binary, this side or that side. Left or right, good or evil, us or them. And once you're in that box, the illusion of choice becomes a prison. Because now, you're not just choosing a candidate. You're defending a side. You're emotionally invested, trapped in confirmation bias, seeking information that validates your view and rejecting everything else. And when that happens, they've won. You can't question the system when you're too busy fighting for your place in it. But what if you could see behind the curtain? What if I told you the platforms they run on, the values they preach, are shaped by predictive analytics? That algorithms dissect your behavior, your likes, your fears, and tell campaigns exactly what to say, exactly how to say it, exactly when to post it. Your entire online footprint becomes a mirror, and they reflect it back to you, polished and weaponized. And you think, that one gets me. But it's not empathy. It's engineering. It's not that they believe what you believe. It's that they've calculated that saying it earns your vote. And the more you feel seen, the more blind you become to the trick. Because here's the final twist. When the options are designed, when the messaging is engineered, when your fears are mapped and your loyalties preloaded, it doesn't matter who you choose. You'll always choose exactly what they expect you to. And the most brilliant part? You'll believe it was your idea, because the illusion of choice doesn't need chains or threats. Just enough comfort, just enough fear. And a box on a screen with two names, both whispering, "You're free." But freedom isn't in choosing from a menu. It's in realizing the menu was never yours to write. And until that moment, you'll keep ordering from the same kitchen, hungry, hopeful, and controlled. Enemies are powerful things. They shape your fears. They sculpt your values. They give your pain a face. And when those enemies are chosen for you, not by chance, but by careful construction, something sinister unfolds beneath the surface. Because in the world of dark politics, enemies aren't just found. They're manufactured, not to be defeated, but to be needed. Think about it. Loyalty without conflict is fragile. It drifts, it fades. But loyalty forged in the fires of fear, of hate, of war, even imagined war, that kind of loyalty lasts. And that's the trap. Polarization isn't a side effect of the political system. It is the system. Us versus them. The righteous versus the corrupted. The patriots versus the traitors. You versus your neighbor. Every system of control needs a distraction. And there's no more effective distraction than a perpetual enemy. Someone to blame, someone to rally against, someone who makes the chaos feel justified. Because when people are divided, they can't look up. Only sideways and downward, never inward. It starts subtly. You hear phrases like, "They don't share our values." They're trying to destroy everything we believe in. They're not real citizens, they're infiltrators. And slowly, they become less human. Just labels, caricatures, not a person with a story, but a threat with a slogan. This is called dehumanization. And it's a psychological weapon used in propaganda throughout history. When people are dehumanized, empathy switches off, logic disengages, morality blurs. And once that line is crossed, anything becomes justifiable. But here's where it turns darker. Manufactured enemies are not just invented out of thin air. They're sculpted from fragments of truth, wrapped in distortion, and repeated until they become emotionally real. It's not about accuracy. It's about utility. Who is the most useful villain today? Sometimes it's immigrants. Sometimes it's elites. Sometimes it's journalists, scientists, teachers, artists, protesters. The face changes. The effect remains. A common enemy binds fractured followers. It provides identity through opposition. It simplifies a complex world into a digestible narrative. We are good. They are bad. And in that simplicity, nuance dies. Because polarization has a secret. It doesn't just divide you from others. It rewires your thinking. Once locked in, you begin interpreting everything through the lens of your allegiance. If someone on your side lies, it was necessary. If someone on the other side speaks the truth, it was manipulation. It's called motivated reasoning, a defense mechanism where we process information not to find truth, but to protect identity. And identity is the true battleground here, because the more deeply you define yourself by your side, your party, your flag, the more power those at the top hold over you. Because now, disagreeing isn't just a political act. It's a betrayal. It's disloyal. It's dangerous. And once you've fused your identity with a side, you'll defend it even when it hurts you, even when it contradicts your values, even when it harms the people around you, even when the ones pulling the strings have long stopped pretending to care. That's when the trap snaps shut. Because the goal was never unity. It was never peace. It was loyalty. Loyalty fueled by resentment, fanned by outrage, fed by the algorithm. Because every time you rage share a post, every time you mock the other side, every time you cut someone off for disagreeing, the machine celebrates. You've become a soldier, not of justice, but of narrative. And narratives are the true currency of power. Once your enemy is etched into your worldview, you won't even notice how much you've changed, how much more tribal, more reactive, more fearful you've become. They've made you predictable. You'll vote out of spite. You'll protest out of anger. You'll defend corruption if it means defeating your enemy. And you'll call it patriotism, but it's not. It's possession. And here's the final turn of the screw. The enemy you hate is just as manipulated as you are. They were given you as their villain. They were shown your flaws, your worst moments, your caricatures. They were fed fear, too. And now you're both trapped on opposite sides of a false war, defending the very systems that poisoned the well. Because when enemies are manufactured, everyone becomes a puppet, except the ones holding the strings. So ask yourself, who benefits from your outrage? Who profits from your division? Who stays in power when the people hate each other more than they question authority? You already know the answer. You just have to look past the enemy they gave you and ask why you needed one in the first place. Because sometimes the scariest truth isn't what the enemy might do. It's who you become in the name of fighting them. Control is never about the moment. It's not about one speech, one policy, one election. Real control plays the long game. And in that game, the goal isn't to win your vote today. It's to reshape the way you think tomorrow. Slowly, subtly, permanently. It begins with repetition, not just in messaging, but in emotional patterns. If they can make you feel a certain way every time you hear a buzzword, a flag, a face, they don't need to argue anymore. The emotion does it for them. Fear, pride, disgust, rage. You don't notice the change as it happens. You laugh at the sound bites, you nod during the ads. You scroll through outrage disguised as news, not realizing that behind every headline, a subtle hook is being laid. Until one day, you're not reacting to the message, you're reacting to the signal, the color of a tie, the accent of a voice, the way a phrase sounds like something they would say. That's not politics, that's conditioning. And conditioning rewires everything. It's not just how you vote. It's how you see the world, what you question, what you trust, what you dismiss without even realizing it. The long game doesn't want your agreement. It wants your assumptions, your reflexes, your silence when silence is useful. And democracy, real democracy, can't survive that. Because democracy isn't just about ballots. It's about awareness, skepticism, choice. And when choice becomes performance, democracy becomes theater, a stage, a script. Actors wearing conviction like costume, trading promises like currency, while the real decisions are written backstage, far from the lights. And here's the twist. They need the theater. They need you to believe you're still in control, because belief is the final lever. If they can make you feel heard, you'll stop listening. If they can make you feel seen, you'll stop looking deeper. If they can make you feel free, you'll never notice the chains. And those chains are now digital. Every thought you've posted, every link you've clicked, every moment you hesitated before swiping, all of it has been cataloged. Not by spies in shadows, but by systems, algorithms, machines that don't sleep, don't forget, don't forgive. They don't need to guess what you'll think. They already know. And political actors? They're learning to use those predictions not just to follow you, but to lead you, to guide you toward pre-selected beliefs, to slowly tighten the walls of your worldview until any thought outside of it feels dangerous, alien, wrong. And when that happens, censorship doesn't need to be enforced. You'll self-censor. You'll silence yourself for fear of exile from your own tribe. That's when they know the long game has worked. Because when they can convince you that their narrative is your thought, that their fear is your instinct, that their enemy is your threat, they don't need to control you anymore. You'll do it yourself. That's the quiet horror, not the loud control, but the calm, smiling, daily compliance. You think you're thinking, but you're repeating. You think you're resisting, but you're playing your part. So the real question isn't whether politicians are manipulating you. It's how deeply those manipulations have taken root. How many of your values were planted by someone else? How many of your fears were rehearsed for you in back rooms by strategists who know that fear lingers longer than facts? How many of your truths are actually scripts? And if you dug deep enough, what would you find underneath? Your voice or theirs? Now, breathe. The lights dim, the applause fades, and the theater empties out. You're alone again, standing in the silence after the show. It's colder here, quieter. You can feel the stillness pressing against your skin, like the absence of noise is its own kind of sound. Think back to the images you were shown, the enemies you were handed, the choices you believed were yours. Like shadows on a wall, they danced in front of you. Convincing, weren't they? But now you've seen what lies behind the curtain. The hands that pulled the strings, the words designed to stir something deep and ancient in your mind. Fear, belonging, control, all of it carefully chosen. Not for truth, but for effect. That's what makes it so terrifying. Because the best manipulations aren't loud. They don't force you. They invite you. Softly, patiently, until you forget you were ever invited at all. Until it feels like you've always believed what they told you to. But now you know better. And the question remains, when you wake up tomorrow, whose voice will be speaking in your mind? Yours or theirs? Are you sure?